an effect! We got 700 attack points! I've done it. I've done it! I've done it! Just one final piece, and I've built the perfect deck! I've built the perfect deck! Yes!
What's up, crew? Welcome back to Libertalia Game Supply. Today we are taking a look at Mementos. Memento is an archetype of retrained normal monsters, some of which you may have seen in that intro there. They all have been given effects, and they are all meant to serve the purpose of summoning the Nether Skull Dragon and then just fueling the Nether Skull Dragon to do whatever it is that it does. Most of this new stuff comes out in Valiant Smashers in a few weeks here, so it'll be coming out pretty soon. And for what the deck does, it actually does it fairly well. And what it does, if you're unfamiliar, is it's kind of similar to Lightsworn, sort of. The Nether Skull Dragon's essentially their Judgment Dragon, but I would say it's probably not quite as good as JD, if I'm being honest. And its summoning condition is that you have to take 5 different Memento monsters from your hand or graveyard, shuffle them back into your deck, and then you can special summon it. So most of the monsters circle around trying to put those 5 different monsters in your hand or graveyard to meet that summoning condition as quick as possible. For the level 4 and lower Mementos, they all have 2 effects. The level 1s have quick effects that you can activate if the big boy's on the field. The 2, 3, and 4 just have 2 different effects that you can choose to use when you see fit. And then the 5 and 8 have 2 effects, but their first effects are just special summoning effects, and they don't really do anything to further your board state as far as getting you to the Nether Skull. The 5 second effect definitely does, it's very important. The 8 is not great, I'm only playing it because it's a name. But we'll start off here with Triple Memento Goblin level 1. During your main phase, if you control the big boy, you can discard this as a quick effect, and then your opponent can't target Memento monsters you control with card effects this turn. It's decent. The Nether Skull Dragon doesn't have any built-in protection, which is one of my biggest issues with the deck at the moment, so having anything between these two that can kind of simulate having that built-in protection is good. Its second effect is way better though. It essentially lets you search your entire deck for whatever Memento card you want, and that effect is when it's on the field, you can destroy a Memento monster you control, so itself or something else, and then send 2 Memento cards with different names from each other from your deck to the graveyard, except another copy of itself. Now the reason that matters is because of the Attic Ghost. We'll get to that in a moment here, but essentially the Attic Ghost will then just take whatever out of the graveyard and put it back in your hand, and so the Goblin would be able to send the Attic Ghost plus whatever you want to search, and then the Attic Ghost will give you that other card back to your hand. We've got 2 copies of Mace. I was playing this at 1. I bumped it up to 2 just because its effect on the field would let you search the Bone Party, which is an important piece of the combo that I will show you later in the video. Its effect when in hand while you have the big boy on board is you can discard it as a quick effect and then essentially just mind control something and then just give it back in the end phase. And once again, it's just some sort of protection for the Nether Skull that doesn't do it for itself. When it's on the field, it can destroy Memento cards, so pretty much all of them are either themselves or any other ones, and then this can search any Memento card and add it to your hand. So it can search your spells and traps, so the Bone Party, which is really important for starting your combos, the Bone Back, which can give you a little bit of a grind game, and then the Fracture Dance and the Cranium Burst, which is just some back row, some control elements. I consider it less good than the Goblin because the Goblin will give you a monster on the field and something in your hand, where this will just give you something in your hand, but still can be important, especially if you find a way to get additional summons or your main normal summon is not available to you. This can get you started. We're only playing 2 copies of the Attic Ghost. This is one of my favorite cards in the deck, and the reason it's only at 2 is, well, they're all once per turn, and this has a very specific use. So if it is normal or special summoned, you can take a Memento card from your graveyard and add it to your hand. So that's how you're searching the other card off of the Goblin effect. If this card is sent to the graveyard by Memento monster's effect, it can special summon itself out of the graveyard, and then it gets its effect to take something out of the graveyard and put it back in your hand. I had it at 1 and I liked it at 1 at just fine. However, the Mementos send from deck, not deck or hand, and so if you draw your 1 copy, you no longer have access to a pretty important piece of comboing just in general with this deck, and so I bumped it to 2 just to try to avoid that from happening. Then we got 3 copies of Fairy Witch. This is your best normal summon in the deck, I would say. Either this or the Dark Blade. On summon, normal or special, you can take a Memento monster from your deck and add it to your hand. This is going to either be used to search the Seahorse or the Nether Skull Dragon, depending on what you've already opened, and it can essentially give you like your whole combo to get the Nether Skull on board with 1 or 2 cards. Once it's on the field, you can destroy a Memento monster you control, either itself or something else, and then you can special summon a level 2 or lower Memento from your graveyard, so any of these. And that can be useful for like getting the Goblin back if you had to ditch it with like the Foolish Burial or something. So a lot of really good starter effects here, definitely a 3 of. And we're only playing the 1 Dark Blade. I know it said it was the only other good normal summon in the deck, and that's true, but that's only true if you're trying to get to the Fairy Witch. You could probably bump this to 2. I don't know that I would ever feel like bumping it to 3, but I suppose I could be convinced. On normal or special summon, you can discard a Memento card to pop or spell or trap. I guess that could be relevant. Its better effect is when it's on the field, destroy a Memento monster you control, and then special summon a level 3 or lower Memento monster from your deck. So in the combo you'll see here at the end, I'll just use its effect to pop itself to give me the Goblin in order to set the graveyard up for the Nether Skull. And so it is important in that regard, and so that's why I still have it in here at all, apart from needing the names for the Nether Skull summoning conditions anyway. I do like this one, but it just feels like it's more of a middle ground than it is an actual starter. We're playing 3 of the Seahorse. It can summon itself out of your hand as long as you don't control anything other than Memento monsters. So if you have no monsters, it can still special summon itself. It's just if you have something that isn't a Memento, it no longer can do so. Once it's on the board, destroy a Memento monster, and then you can send any number of Memento monsters from your deck with different names to the graveyard, whose levels are equal to or less than what you sent. So it's kind of like Goblin, but it's got more restrictions. It's only going to send monsters, so it can't search the spells and traps like the Goblin could with the Attic Ghost, but it can fill up the graveyard with more names. So if it pops itself, you can send 5, so you could send like the 4 and a 1, a 3 and a 2, a 3, a 1 and a 1, a 2, a 1 and a 1, and there's not an additional one to do that with the 4th card. You get the picture. It sets up the graveyard really nice, and it's a free body on board, which is important for being able to make the link monsters that you can choose between when you're going through your combos. The Horned Dragon kind of sucks. It special summons itself from the hand if you have 3 different Memento names in your graveyard. It does nothing when it's on the field other than have 2850 attack, and while it's there, if it gets destroyed, it lets you destroy 3 cards on the field so long as one of them is a Memento monster that you control. So I suppose at the very least it is some removal, but it requires your opponent to destroy it knowing that it is a removal card, and they could just banish it or bounce it or whatever. Then we got 3 copies of Nether Skull. I don't necessarily think I like it at 3 all that much. The only reason it's at 3 is because in order for you to combo, you need to use your searches for other pieces of the deck and not this. And so I just wanted to maximize chances of drawing into it as much as possible. So between the 3 copies and the 3 prosperity, there should be a reasonable likelihood that you can open this thing without having to use the searches off of these other effects for it, because doing so kind of ends the value of whatever that search was, versus searching or dumping other stuff can keep the combo going. For hand traps, we're playing triple Ash and 1 Nibiru. If you're going second for sure, probably switch that out for other Nibirus or whatever other hand traps you decide are going to be valuable. The triple prosperity, I was playing around with hand destruction and card destruction. Another huge issue with this deck is that they don't have effects when they go to the graveyard, other than the Memento Attic Ghost, which wouldn't get its effect off of either of those 2 cards, only off of in-archetype cards. And so I thought that that'd be really good because it's essentially free draw power, just because you need the cards in the graveyard anyway in order to get Nether Skull live, but it just isn't good. It's too easy to, like, you make your opponent send cards with both of those as well, and so you could just get screwed because you're giving them effects or letting them draw out of a shitty hand that they got. So I cut those. Prosperity is the way to go. Plus, it's just gotten a super rare reprint, so it should be very cheap now. We got 1 for 1. This is kind of just like a replacement for Bone Party. It can extend you in a similar way to the Bone Party, just a little bit less so. It can put your Mace or your Goblin on field if you need to search any particular card. You just pick between the 2. We've got triple Bone Party, huge piece of comboing in this deck. Destroy a Memento monster from your hand or face-up field. From your hand is an important aspect of this. Take 1 Memento monster with a different name from your deck and either add it to your hand or special summon it in defense position, so it can get you to any of these other monsters. This you cannot special summon off of the Bone Party, but you can search it to your hand. so that is important. And then when it's in the graveyard, it has an additional effect. You can banish it and then target a memento you control, and then when it attacks a defense position monster, it does piercing. Nether Skull does that on its own already if you don't control any other monsters, so you can just build your board around that idea, or if you want to have the other monster on board for whatever reason, you could just use this to do the piercing anyway. Then we're playing the 1 Memento Bone back. If one of your face-up Memento monsters leaves the field because of an opponent's card, you can special summon a Nether Skull from your hand or deck, ignoring its summoning conditions. And then if your opponent were to move a Memento card out of your graveyard, so shuffle it back into your deck, banish it, whatever the case may be, you can banish this card out of your graveyard and then special summon as many Memento monsters as possible from your hand or deck, so you essentially can fill the board with 5 Memento monsters. Now that effect can't summon the Nether Skull, but it can set you up with 5 monsters on board in order to then use the Nether Skull on your next turn, so a good one-of, but it's fairly situational, so just a one-of felt fine. We've got the 1 Nether Skull Temple Memento Land. It's kind of a lackluster field spell. At 1, it's fine. At multiples, it is not going to be good. If your Memento monster battles, your opponent can't activate spells or traps until the end of the damage step, so protecting that Nether Skull. If a monster you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can target one of them, special summon a Memento monster with a lower level from your hand or graveyard. That effect is a lot more useful because you're going to be destroying your own Mementos for these effects anyway, so if you happen to draw into this, throw it on the board, and then you pop something to summon something else, or whatever the case may be, you can then just put that monster back on board to continue link summoning or have as more destruction fodder for other effects. And then once per turn during the end phase, you can target a Memento spell or trap in your graveyard and set it. So you can set any of the ones you use. This one you could use as like defensive almost, so you can set it, and then if they were to try to remove the Bone Dragon, you can just tribute it to summon something else, because if the Bone Dragon's banished, you can't summon it anymore, but if you send your own Bone Dragon to the graveyard and put something else on the board, you can just summon it back out of the graveyard. Maybe you got stuck with one of these lower level ones with no attack or defense, you can summon the Horn Dragon out of your deck instead, you know, whatever the case may be. The traps are actually pretty decent if you control the Nether Skull, so gives you a little bit of recursion there. I got the 1 Foolish Burial. I was also playing Reasoning and Monster Gate, and I took those out for the same reasons I took out the hand and card destruction. They can all be normal or special summons, so you're not going to get a huge mill setting up your graveyard anyway, and they don't get their effects unless they get sent off of Memento-based effects for the most part, and so the Foolish Burial would just be to fix that graveyard a little bit. So if you needed just one more name because you got stopped somewhere in the combo, or if you needed to send the Nether Skull so that you could summon it out of the graveyard, it's still a good card, it's just not as good as it would be in most other graveyard-based decks. The 1 Call By to stop hand traps. Double Lightning Storm, because if they have a ton of monsters, you need to get rid of them. If they have a ton of spells or traps, you need to get rid of them. If they have a ton of both, you just pick the one you think is going to be the worst option. This is a pretty fragile deck. I think it's a huge issue that it is such a large engine of cards in order to do what it's supposed to do that you can't really sub in any type of additional engine support unless you take a huge hit on one other aspect of the deck. And so you kind of just gotta play hoping for the best. So I tried to play some back row and front row hate. Lightning Storm is the most efficient form of that, but if there's one over the other that you feel is more important, like not a lot of decks are playing back row, you can just play the Raigekis instead. For our in-archetype traps, we've got the double Fracture Dance, the 1 Cranium Burst. Fracture Dance can pop a card on the field if you control Memento, and then if you control the Nether Skull, it can pop an additional card on the field. And then when it's in the graveyard, if an attack is declared involving one of your Memento monsters, you can banish it, and all of your opponent's monsters lose 1,000 attack. So it can help you to OTK with the Nether Skull, it can help you to protect some of your other not so good Memento monsters. And it's a remove 2 for free so long as you control the boss, so pretty good. The Cranium Burst is a continuous trap. While you control a Memento monster, your opponent's monsters that can attack must attack the Memento monster you control with the highest attack. So the idea here would be you set up your Nether Skull, hopefully you can protect it, flip your Cranium Burst, and then they have to attack into the Nether Skull on their turn, and it's got 5,000 attacks, so they're probably not attacking over it. And then it does have an interesting effect negation effect, so if you have the Nether Skull on board, when your opponent activates a monster effect, you can make your Nether Skull lose 1,000 attack and defense, and then negate the effect if it does so. And that effect is once per chain, so it's almost similar to an Appaloosa type deal. You can negate monster effects so long as you have attack points to lose. It's just if it gets small enough, they're just going to attack over it and kill it, but ideally you're stopping the right things and they're not going to attack over it. An interesting card, but a fair bit more gimmicky than the the Fracture Dance is. And then double Imperm because it's good. Now the extra deck is just the rank 2 monsters I think I'm going to use, plus a few others that I'm probably not going to use and are going to get sent off of Prosperity anyway. The 2 ones are here because if you end up getting stopped somewhere where you have something left on the board that you need in the graveyard just to fulfill the 5 monster names for the Nether Skull, you can just link them away into one of these, hopefully. I mean, they're a little bit more niche, but there's not a really good link one that's super generic anyway. The IP and SP are just mandatory these days, unfortunately, but in this deck, you could probably cut them. You're not really playing around an extra deck, you're playing around the Nether Skull, and so these could be something else. We're playing the one Cerberus, the one Phoenix. It's some removal that you wouldn't otherwise have access to necessarily, so they're fine. The Underclock Taker I thought was interesting because you can summon it in the combo I show you to make something lose 5,000 attack, or probably make it 0, meaning you're going to attack over it for 5k with the Nether Skull, and then attack with 1k with the Taker. It just, the Sorcerer is what gets you the OTK. This is just kind of like, it's dumb, but I thought it was funny, so it's in there. We got double Azalea. It's free removal when you summon it, and you play a lot of dark monsters, so it's pretty easy to summon. We got the double Sorcerer. This is what facilitates the OTK with the Nether Skull. So when it's pointing to a monster, if that monster inflicts battle damage, you get to gain that many life points. And then if life points are gained, it can burn both players for 1,000 damage. So essentially, super simple. Against an open board, you summon the Nether Skull and the Sorcerer. You're going to attack with Nether Skull. You're going to gain 5,000 when they take the 5,000 damage, so you're at 13k to their 3k. The second effect will activate, burning you to 12k and burning them to 2k, and then it has 2,000 attack, and that would be the game there. And then we're playing 2 copies of Donner. This one is very important because in the combo you're going to be left with 2 monsters on board before you summon the Nether Skull, which is where I'm making the Sorcerer. But if they have a large board of monsters that you can attack over and do the OTK anyway, you would just make the Donner instead, pop itself plus something else, then summon the Nether Skull so it gets all of its effects and attack all of those monsters with just the Nether Skull. And then double Typhon because it's just really good in decks where it's easy to get stopped because it's like a 1 card or bust type of situation, and so I like it quite a bit. I was considering playing the Morganite in here just because having that additional summon does seem like it would make a huge difference. The draw effect, however, is super slow, and I do feel like the draw effect was necessary, and so that's why we ended up ultimately going with the Prosperity instead. The Designators you would just side in depending on how heavy the hand traps are. You can get hand trapped to death with this deck because it's so monster effect dependent. And then Black Garden just felt kind of right. If you really wanted to take that final step into complete casual bullshit, you play the Black Garden version of the deck, and you can easily summon all the tokens you need to attack for game with the Nether Skull. It's just the more moving parts you got, the more likely it is not going to work. But keep that in mind if you want to play some jank. Let's go ahead and walk through that combo real quick so you can see what I'm talking about, and just play around with it. The deck actually does a lot of interesting things pretty well. It's just the things that would make it a really good deck, it doesn't do it all. So it doesn't protect itself. It doesn't get effects out of being dumped to the graveyard. It also requires a huge number of monsters in the main deck, so you can't really combine it with a whole lot of stuff unless you're going to play like a 60 card version of the deck or something. But it is still quite interesting, so definitely play around with it. I'm assuming it's going to be fairly cheap unless they make the Nether Skull like, I don't know, it could be. There's no way. It's going to be cheap. There's no way this is not a cheap deck, is my assumption. Anyway, into the combo. Alright, so I'll take you through this 2-card OTK here. Remember, you do need to be attacking through an open board for you to get the whole 8,000 damage if you don't have access to that. So, like Lightning Storm didn't show up or whatever the case may be, you have no other removal, then you're better off just playing through the combo and playing Donner instead of the Seebex Sorcerer. You're better off just playing through the combo as is, but summoning the Donner instead of the Seebex Sorcerer, and then using the Donner to pop something in itself so that the Nether Skull is on the board by itself, because then you can at least attack all the monsters they have, and even then it's still decently easy to hit the OTK if they have like 3 or 4 monsters on board. So we're starting with our Fairy Witch and our Bone Party, and this is what we need to get to our OTK. It kind of sucks that a spell is involved as a necessary piece because it is searchable, but you have to kind of like work around other stuff in the deck for that to work out. We use the Fairy Witch, activate the effect on Summon to Search. We'll hold off on that Bone Party for a while, and we're going to grab the Seahorse. Seahorse is going to use its effect to special summon itself, and then we'll use its effect again to target and send some stuff to the graveyard. So now what you send with the Seahorse, it doesn't really matter. If you send itself, you would be able to skip the step with the Dark Blade later on here, but we're going to send the Fairy Witch instead, and then we can send an Attic Ghost, and we can send one of our level 1s. We'll send the Mace this time around. We use the Added Ghost effect out of the graveyard to summon itself. Still hold off on the Bone Party. I know you guys like to party with the bones, but not yet. We will use the Added Ghost effect to add something back to our hand. Now, you can't do anything with it, but you can use the Bone Party effect and target something in your hand, which is what we're going to do right now, and so that's why we're doing that, because you still need 2 monsters on board in order to summon the Seebex Sorcerer or whatever you end up making. So we use that Bone Party, we sent the Mace, and we're going to summon the Dark Blade here. We're going to special summon in defense mode, and then Dark Blade's effect is going to come in handy right now. It'll send itself. It can send whatever. It does not matter. We just need to be summoning the Goblin. Goblin's effect will activate. Same deal. You can send whatever you want. We'll send itself because it doesn't matter. And you're going to send 2. So we're going to send the Nether Skull. And just to be safe, you might as well send one of your other unique names. So we'll send the Horned Dragon. So now we have the 2 materials on board. We're going to make our Seebex Sorcerer. We'll use our 2 materials. And then the Nether Skull can summon itself out of the graveyard using 5. So you can put 5 back. Whatever 5 you want. We'll say the one-ofs and a couple of the other better starter cards are going back, and we'll summon the Nether Skull in a zone that Sorcerer points to. So now here's how the OTK would happen. We'll go to battle phase. We'll attack with the Nether Skull. On the attack with the Nether Skull, Sorcerer will activate. We're gonna bump ourselves by 5,000. When we gain life points, we can then burn both players by 1,000. My head is covering this at the moment, but just trust me, they're at 2,000 life points, we attack for 2,000, and that's game. So remember, that OTK doesn't work unless you can create an open board state. So you need the Lightning Storms, or you could play some Raigekis or Dark Holes or something like that. And you could even go as far as putting in the Blackguard and stuff with more hand traps or whatever, just to try to keep their board open so you can Blackguard them and give them all the tokens. And then use the Donner to get rid of itself in order to just have all the attacks on the tokens and inflict piercing with the Nether Skull. But the more pieces you add into this that don't directly use the deck because of all the weaknesses we talked about already, the less consistent it's going to be. So it kind of just depends on what it is you want to be able to do with it. I think the way I have it here right now gives you at least a little bit of middle ground between going for that OTK if you can happen to create the situation, or still being able to play out a couple of turns because you have enough other stuff to make that a possibility as well. But if you got any other interesting little tech cards for this deck, I'd be happy to hear about it. This one was interesting. Definitely play around with this. It's pretty simple. I got the hang of it real fast, so I'm sure you can too. We are currently about 3 weeks away from being able to get almost all of this stuff in the TCG. I think the only thing we don't have is Sorcerer, which comes out in Phantom Nightmare. So we'll keep working on a few other things that are coming out in that Valiant Smashers set and see how that goes for us. In the meantime, happy deck building. I will see you guys in the next one. Have a good one. Goodbye.